Well, it is quite difficult for me as both a lawyer and as a politician to open this up to any questions, but perhaps the professor will also help me answer any questions that you may have.
Come on, your one opportunity to ask Abraham Lincoln a question. Please.
Sir, I'm wondering how far your voice could carry. How many people were able to hear those words that you spoke on that day?
Well, if you would like to speak, you would not have something like this that can project one's voice. So therefore, at the cemetery there were, I forget what the estimates were, but over 10,000 people were there. And so therefore you should be able to cast your voice very far and for a long period of time. So you need to develop a good set of lungs.
Mr. President, at the start of the war, how long did you think it was going to last?
I did not think it was going to last very long because actually I thought most people in the South did not want to leave the Union. And therefore I did not press too hard at the beginning. You know, we had a reception at the White House. My wife had bought a number of furnishings for the White House, and so we had a reception in February, and by that time not too much had happened, and one scathing reporter said about this reception that, well, we can show the world that even though we can't fight, we can certainly dance. And but then shortly thereafter I realized that I had to touch the slavery institution and said, I have got done throwing grass. I propose trying stones. The hour comes for dealing with slavery.
Mr. President, have you had any contact with President Davis?
We have, that is a very good question. We have, through emissaries, we have communicated. He has not much appreciated the terms by which I have told him that hostilities will cease, and that is they must submit to the authority of the federal government. And now that the Emancipation Proclamation has been signed, they must submit to that too. So we are still in negotiation.
Mr. President, you had mentioned about the two great victories, you know, Grant in the West and Meade. At this time that Gettysburg was started, wasn't Grant already on his way east to take over the Army?
General Grant was still in Vicksburg, although shortly after he had that victory, I said, Grant is my man and I am his for the rest of the war. It was later on, before I brought him east, I had to send a note to see if he had any political aspirations. And so when the answer came back, no, he had none. We eventually, General Rosecrans got into trouble in Tennessee, so we first brought General Grant to take over for General Rosecrans. So he was making his way slowly east.
When did you first realize that slavery was a stain upon the structures?
The question is, when did I realize that slavery was a stain upon the country? That is a very good question. To answer that question, I need to say that I have, as perhaps some people would say, I'm somewhat tender-hearted in the sense that I went out hunting and I shot a bird, and when I saw the blood, I said, that is the last time I'm going to go hunting. When I had took a riverboat down the Mississippi, and we went down south, I saw a number of Negro men chained and shackled. And I just thought that they looked like the poorest creatures on earth. And I knew that there was something profoundly wrong in that. I think that as a white man, I also resisted the fact that my father could loan me out to neighboring farmers, and I could do an honest day's worth of work, and he would collect the money. Which is why oftentimes when I came around to being against slavery in a public way, I was always hitting upon, if you do a day's worth of labor, you should be compensated for it.
Am I remembering correctly that at one point earlier in the war, you said that in order to preserve the Union, you would either see slavery remain or slavery not remain, or have part of the country holding slaves and part of the country not? And what was your thinking about that sort of situation?
Well, I would like to think that I was elected president in part because I just wanted to keep everything the way it was. I was not going to touch slavery in the areas where it existed. That's the same as George Washington proceeded when he was president. I was going to just carry out from his stance on the matter throughout my term. And so I was more than willing to leave slavery where it was. I just did not believe that it should extend into the national territories. And that is where there was disagreement. I felt, just as George Washington and many of the founding fathers felt, that slavery would eventually die on the vine. And it was not until hostilities commenced that, after a while, those slave owners in rebellion had a military advantage by having slaves. And so it was through the military advantage that I, as Commander-in-Chief, could do something about slavery.
I'll add, the statement you're referring to was a newspaper editorial that Lincoln wrote, related in response to an article Horace Greeley had written, who was the editor of the New York Tribune. That actual response that Lincoln penned is actually at the Wadsworth Athenaeum in Harvard. It's owned by them. And so Lincoln did say exactly what the way that you stated, is that if I can save the Union, I shall do it by freeing none of the slaves, by freeing some of the slaves, or by freeing all the slaves. He says his paramount object is to save the Union, not to do anything about slavery. That's the gist of it.
When you were campaigning in 1860, you gave a speech at New Blossom. And during that time, did you and your cabinet, or future cabinet, or advisors, ever believe that there would be so much white opposition to abolition, say in New York, where people rioted because the freed slaves would take their jobs, or the business class in Connecticut was opposed because of their exports of cotton, and we were always led to believe that Connecticut was one of the centers of abolition.
And sir, I'm sorry, your question is, was I aware of that when I was here in New Haven?
Were you aware that this may occur among the white population in the North?
Yes, but which is why I was also saying that if you do not oppose slavery, then slavery will eventually be among you. And you as laborers will therefore be competing against people who do not have to earn wages. So therefore, slavery is a cancer on this nation. And I knew about white opposition to the abolitionist cause, which is why I still went ahead and signed the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in those areas of rebellion, even though there were going to be elections held the next month. And many Republicans lost their seats in the Congress, as well as some governorships across the North. But as I once said, I may not be a bold man, but I have a knack of sticking to my promises.